see if this works. Oh, yeah, all right, cool. So, hi everyone. I'm Colin. I also go by Patrick. Patrick's my first name, so that's why I'm listed on, because I have a government job teaching at Dallas College. But my friends, family all call me Colin, so you're welcome to as well. So this talk is titled 2 Years of Indie Development. So a bit about me. I'm a game designer, mostly like programming and design, though I do a bit of writing and music stuff as well. I am a programming and design instructor at Dallas College, which is the community college here. So that's a 2-year degree. So I'm teaching really all of our like programming and kind of like introductory design courses. I've also, as of last year, I've been a speaker at GDC, and I'm going to be talking a bit about that game that I worked on today. So as a indie designer, the studio that I run is called Atoll Games. Which is really like a long collaboration with my friend Heather, who I met at UT more than 10 years ago. So our goal at Atoll Games is to make games where the player can play with generous and rewarding systems to discover enriching moments. And we really passionately believe the games will shape the future, whether we want them to or not. And so we want to fill that future with things that we cherish and are interested in. So a bit about Heather and I. We met at UT, actually doing the student club jams. So the fact that y'all are here, like you may be sitting next to somebody that you're going to be making games with for quite a long time. We did a lot of overscoped projects, which was maybe bad, but you know we learned a lot. We dropped out, good question mark. I don't want to suggest that to anybody. And then we got jobs, which is definitely good. We all like jobs and money. So a bit technical details about kind of all of these projects that I'm going to be talking about today. So these were all made in a custom C++ engine that we've been working on for a long time. Like I said, I'm mainly a gameplay programmer. So, you know, my interest in programming is mostly from the perspective of like making games and making pretty things happen on the screen. But I wind up doing a lot of work you know, on different systems and stuff. Like I did a lot of work to port the game to the Steam Deck and stuff like that. So Heather primarily does like core engine development. And then we do a lot of collaboration with artists who are really just friends whose stuff I like and I hire them. So these are some of the games that I have worked on. The Art of Flight is our last commercial release, which is primarily what I'm going to be talking about today. But I'm going to touch on some of these other things as well. So this talk is going to be kind of about tracing a few themes in my design work that I've noticed over the last couple of years, talk a little bit about my process and approach to indie development, talk about some specific design decisions on the games that I thought was interesting, and also just like share some things that I think are interesting and some influences that I would like to, you know, like to share with people and see what they think about. So over these 2 years, I had worked on a number of games. So the main one, of course, was The Art of Flight, which was a commercial game made mostly part-time with a team kind of fluctuating. But I think at the end of the day, we had 7 or 8 people that wound up contributing different things to it. But, you know, primarily it was me, me or Heather primarily through that. And we worked on that part-time for about 2 years. I took that game to a number of conventions. So we went to both PAXs. We went to DreamHack like 3 times, which luckily is here. So that's pretty easy. We also went to Play NYC. I'm going to talk some about the process of taking it to those conventions. But I did a lot of other stuff while I was working on this. And that's kind of one of the things I want to really emphasize in this talk is like what the flexibility of being an independent developer kind of affords you. And so I also worked on this game, Found in Translation, which was really like a souped up game jam version. So we kind of did a jam version and then iterated on it over time. That wound up being an official selection at the Experimental Game Showcase at GDC. So that was very cool to get to fly out there and talk about it. I also did a couple other games and a couple other prototypes, one of which I'm working on pretty much full-time now. And in addition to this, I've, of course, had the teaching job, and I've got 2 young kids, so that takes up a lot of time as well. So one of the things that I found as an independent developer that I think works for me pretty well, and one of the reasons I really like being independent, is the ability to work on multiple games kind of at the same time and have multiple projects going. This isn't necessarily something that I learned like from other people in the industry, though I think there are like some examples of this. So this is Amnesia Fortnite, which is something that Double Fine runs. And every year they take, their whole team kind of shuts down. They pivot to doing these 2-week game jams. I think usually they have like 4 or 5 of them going at the same time. They're a relatively small studio, like I think less than 100 people. So, I think that's really cool because they get to kind of go through the design process again. They get to do, prototyping. They get to do pre-production, and then get, new and exciting projects out of this. Even when they might be, mired in a much longer project over a number of years. This idea is something that you also see in literature, which is kind of where I got the idea. That my background is in English studies and literature. And one of my favorite authors, Thomas Pynchon over here, described this as a moment of temporary insanity when he decided to work on multiple novels at the same time. But what I think is really cool is like when you read those books, you can see all of the different ways that they kind of like feed into each other and communicate with each other. And, I think that's a really interesting area to explore in game design. So some of the reasons that I'm a really strong advocate for this, and these aren't necessarily things that I would suggest to like, the first time making a game. But, once you've been independent for a little while, I think, this really starts to shine. So you need some time to stew on your game designs. And like one of the major advantages of being an independent developer is you have a relatively long runway. You have a pretty low burn rate, right? You aren't, getting like a huge studio with a ton of people. You aren't having to pay rent, at one of these big studio spaces. So you're able to take a little bit more time to work on your games and think about these things. And I think when you kind of stew on your design and just let the ideas, kind of happen as they happen and you aren't trying to force it, I think you wind up finding a lot of cool things. And I'm going to talk about some of those cool things I found working on The Art of Flight and some other projects here. It's also a really good way to keep up momentum. I'm sure everyone here has different phases of projects that they like working on. I'm sure like our concept artists really like the beginning of the game, right? That's when they're really needed. They're doing a lot to determine the vision. I'm sure some of our programmers really like the ending phase when they're really like, juicing the performance to get, like microseconds on the CPU. And for me, I really kind of like that, like, beginning to middle stage is really what I find exciting. So by being able to, work on multiple things simultaneously, I'm able to, have parts that I'm really excited about, which makes it much easier to go through kind of some of the drudge work of shipping a game and, maybe fixing the bugs I don't really want to think about, or doing the performance improvements, or doing the, the marketing or the publisher contract stuff or whatever that I don't want to think about. And, I think I want to talk a bit about the term indie. In fact, I don't know if anyone here watches the channel Ace Rolla. I really like his stuff. He actually had a video, about independent and like what indie means. And, a lot of times, at least when I was coming up, right, we were talking about independent as independent of publishers, right? That was kind of the first time you'd actually get a game out onto the internet. But I think it also pays to think about independent as like independent of time constraints, right? Independent of certain, budgetary concerns. Because the more independence you can gain, the more leverage you have essentially over your design. I think those different axes of leverage are really helpful when doing independent work. So another reason to do this, this kind of ties into momentum, but when you're working on a long project, like I said, Art of Flight was 2 years. There are things that are going to happen in your life or the world that you are going to want to talk about through design. At least I have found that to be the case for me. And so Found in Translation was a game that was really able to, kind of talk about and discuss feelings that I had concerning Gaza and concerning ideas of poetry and translation, which were things that I was not thinking at all about when I started on The Art of Flight. And some of these other games, let me play with like narrative systems and, explore ideas of play and culture that, again, might feed back into Art of Flight, but, I don't necessarily have a home for when I'm first thinking about them. So this is another example of that. This is a book called Homo Ludens by Huizinga. Highly encourage everyone to recommend this book. It's like one of the coolest pieces of sociology I've ever read. And, I read this as I was taking Art of Flight to a convention, and it really like solidified a lot of ideas about design for me. And I think, I like being able to kind of immediately respond to those things and just go, oh, well, I want to do a game jam, over a week with my friends or something and talk about some of these things and get these ideas out and not have to treat it like, my independent development is like a corporate gig where I have to, clock in every day and do the work. There's also a lot of advantages for doing this for cross-pollination. So one of the things I'm going to talk about with the Art of Flight is my approach to the music for that game. And it was very hard to, figure out what the kind of voice of the game was. And there were a lot of like false starts and changes in directions. And one of the ways I was able to explore this space was by doing a game jam by myself and just playing around with music for a couple of weeks. And that gave me an opportunity to kind of prototype ideas and take a different approach that actually wound up dramatically influencing what happened in the final game. So I don't want to do the normal kind of programmer thing where you list like all the advantages of something and never talk about the disadvantages. So some of the things that haven't worked for me about simultaneous works is doing like frequent switching. So I don't like the idea of like having I'll have, two-year projects that I'm working on simultaneously, right? You want your other projects to be much smaller scale. You want like off ramps for them, even if they might be like larger pieces. You don't want to wind up in a case where you're like, oh, I'm working on 3 games simultaneously and I'll be done with the first of them in like 2030. That's not a fun feeling. So let's go ahead now and talk about The Art of Flight. So I've got the trailer right here.
This is a space ballet told by velocity and collision. Your ship is your instrument. When you boost or shoot or lock on, it sinks back. But you don't fly just one ship. You extend yourself into many, feeling the separation between them and working together in perfect harmony. Out there, the enemy holds your brothers captive and hunts them down. Last flight, as you escaped through the portal, one of them slipped away, screaming. Would you not die to go back and save your brother? So you jump back in, to dash yourself against the same desires and the same errors. You look back on your narrow wins, the ones you saved, and rummage in your memory through the score holes of those you lost, the shriveled ash of their bodies, each boat holding the other up. But you're on that other side now. You could live, or you could go back to die that dream again. You know it's been brazen into woes. So step back into this cool now and dance once more the art of flight.
So The Art of Flight is a kind of, shmup, classic arcade-style game about controlling a squadron of ships. Kind of everything in the design of that game falls out of that core idea of just taking like a very classic arcade setup. Like for me, Galaga, that was a memory of a game that I had that was very fond. And so I wanted to make something, kind of like that for my kids and just see what interesting design challenges and opportunities came up out of extending that idea. So when I started the game, Heather had quit her job, so we had about 1 year of runway. Like I said, I work a job teaching so that I don't have to worry too much about financial constraints of working on games. And we knew that we wanted to like release a project. We didn't want to just make a year of progress on some other larger thing because we had done that before and it was kind of burned us out. So I pitched a couple of ideas, and Art of Flight really stuck out as the thing that seemed the most approachable. It was kind of the most obvious of what the technical needs for the game were, what the production needs were. So we went ahead and started working on that. And one of the reasons that this was something that we could be so confident in is because I'd actually done a game jam when I was working on my last game. It was like a month before I shipped it. And I did this dinky little game jam, just kind of, playing around with ships, seeing if it worked. And we knew enough that we liked that kind of like core idea of being multiple ships at the same time. And so we thought it was worthwhile pursuing that. So, like I said, the entirety of the game really falls around this core idea of the kinesthetic feeling, right? If you're like cutting vegetables with a knife, or you're driving a car or riding a bike, right? You feel like this is kind of an extension of your body, right? You get this kind of extrasensory feeling. And so I found that when I was controlling these ships, I had a similar thing, but it was very different than something I had experienced before, where I kind of felt myself in these like multiple locations simultaneously. So we just wanted to explore that and see what kind of like narrative and emotional ideas come out of that idea. So we're going to skip this one right here, but some of the things that kind of occurred to me while I was working on this game, and I think it's important, again, for everybody, but especially for independent developers, right? If you're going into your like job, 40, 50 hours a week or whatever, it's pretty easy to find the motivation, even if it's, kind of grueling sometimes. You just know like, hey, this is my job. This is what I do. Other people are depending on me. But when you're independent, it can really be hard sometimes to, remind yourself why you're doing this. And so I think in the beginning, it's very important to find an idea that you are passionate enough about, that you're willing to commit to. And, go ahead, like write those ideas down, right? Make that part of the design doc, communicate that to the team, because that's going to be very important. So we started off making a prototype. We just kind of started from scratch. We ditched the old jam version, ported it to our new engine, and started playing around with it. So this was actually a video of the first time that I remember having fun with the game, which was a couple weeks into development, once we had the kind of the core systems. And what I noticed about this was that what I really enjoyed was flying around the ships, right? It wasn't, shooting them or like controlling these squadrons, but using this missile lock-on ability to kind of get very close, skirt around danger and avoid things. So here is an example from a couple, maybe like a month later. We started getting some particle effects in the game, just testing things out, start playing around with the camera a little bit more, get a feel for kind of the design and what the space we want to explore is. So some of the influences that I had going in, and this isn't an exhaustive list, but these were kind of the four main things that stuck out to me. I just love all of these games a lot. If anyone hasn't played these games here, please do yourself a favor, go play them. I want to talk about some of the things that I really like about them, and some of the things that I try to fit in to the design of the Art of Flight. So Everyday Shooter, which has got to be one of the best games ever made, is like an album of music, right? You put it on, it's like 50 minutes. It has this like set length. It's really beautiful. And it does a great job having what I would call like emotional gameplay. And it's able to kind of pivot these emotions and pivot these feelings just like you would have in music, right? You have a part that's a little chippier, a part that's a little bit more somber. Devil Daggers is a game that I find really interesting, even though I'm pretty bad at it, where playing the game, you build this kind of like mental picture of the game state that doesn't really reflect what you're actually looking at. Like probably the best way I could describe this is like, if you played, a lot of a MOBA, or you've played StarCraft or something like that, you have this kind of idea of the state of the world. It doesn't really matter like where you're looking at. But this game manages to do this in a first-person kind of like crowd control shooter, which I just find really interesting. And I wanted to kind of explore that idea with, controlling these multiple ships if you could have this kind of feeling of where the different ships are without necessarily having to like pay attention to them and keep track of them, get into a flow state. Ikaruga was a game that I really liked in high school. I remember this was on the Xbox Live Arcade, was where I first played it. And, this game just kind of showed me the games could be like very poetic and they could be very moody, even if they were still about like spaceships and, blowing stuff up. So one of the really important design lessons that I took this into the Art of Flight, but, kind of every day I do design work, this idea gets strengthened, is to listen to the game. Like, we all have goals when we are designing games and when we're, like, stepping into a project, certain artistic ideas and ambitions that we want to communicate. But I think it's also really important to listen to the game and kind of cultivate a sense of being able to hear what the game is saying to you. Obviously, like, playtesting and hearing from other players is really important. But I think at the end of the day, you are kind of your best playtester. And being able to pay attention to your own thoughts as you play a game and identify what you are enjoying or not enjoying about the game or what the game is suggesting to you is really important. So, one of the first things, and what I was illustrating with that lock-on ability, was that what I found really fun in these early prototypes was just dodging, right? I found dodging a lot more fun than, doing the kind of like normal projectile management or doing maybe more traditional like bullet hell stuff. I really liked, having to get in close to enemies and move around them. So once we had that ability, then the question as a designer is like, how do you actually get that to happen, right? You need to give the player some reason to do it. And it just did more to kind of emphasize what I found interesting about the game, right? If you just clumped all of your ships together and you made like a really big blob, it's easy to dodge around things then, right? But there's not really any feeling of being these multiple ships, right? You just kind of feel like you're, this big old, bundle, which isn't that different than just being, a single ship. So in general, I think a design rule that I really taken away from this, right, is to like find what the player is doing and find some way to undermine their ability to do that. And a lot of like enemy and boss ideas kind of come out of this idea. Like pretty much every enemy or every boss that we had in the game was like, okay, well, we noticed that the player is doing this, so how can we add something into the mix that makes them like avoid doing that, or makes them really want to do that much more and push them into that that kind of space. So one other aspect of the design that I found really interesting, and this actually showed up in the original prototype, it was probably like the only good thing in the original prototype, honestly, was the idea that when you rescued a ship, it could kind of like fall into place, right? And that led to very free and expressive positioning of your squadron, which I thought was pretty cool. So I've got a little video of showing this here, right? So we've got the ship, you can blow it up, and that ship kind of does a little rotation. It's kind of, masked by the explosion, but it does a little spin and then comes into place, right? So you could try to like group up if you, kind of rush towards it, so where it's going to land and you can try to catch up to it, or you can, spread yourself out, maybe use your missiles here and try to get it into a different location. So that kind of, introduced the idea or put the idea into my head of positioning in the game. And this wound up being, I think, one of the most interesting and kind of constant design things in the game. It just kind of pops up everywhere throughout the design, is the way that the player like wants to position their ships and the way they have to play around the current position of their ships, right? I wanted the formations to feel very dynamic so that you don't just go, oh, well, I have like a little ball of ships here, or I have a row of ships on the bottom, and I just kind of know what that feels like, and now I just go and, play it like a normal bullet hell or something. I wanted this constant feeling of having to like adjust and rethink your formation and kind of scramble with what you're doing. So one of the obvious ideas that, of course, came up is, some way to kind of directly control these formations. Maybe you press a button. This was like an original idea. Maybe you like tap the Y button to form up in a V formation, right? Or you hold the Y button to group up in a circle or something. maybe you touch an item, something like that. But this led to some like design problems, and I think this is another thing worth thinking about as you're like designing or programming a game. Whenever you come across something that's like, ugh, I don't want to program this, or ugh, this is going to be like kind of contrived and specific, and I'm going to have to do a bunch of edge cases or something, like see if there's a way that you can avoid that problem. I think a lot of times programmers, we like hard technical problems. It gives us something like, difficult to wrestle with. But sometimes if you just find a way around that problem, you avoid doing work, you might actually wind up with something more interesting. And one of the reasons I didn't like this is because I found myself, like, as I was programming this, I didn't get very far programming it, but as I was doing it, I kept, like, dictating things, right? I kept telling the player, like, oh, like, this is the formation you should be in, right? Or, oh, like, these are the items to create formations, like, these are the good formations. And I wasn't leaving that up to the player to kind of discover organically through play. So some approaches that we wound up taking instead was to allow objects to kind of dynamically adjust your positions and have to, play around those things. And so I'm going to show one of these here. So this is a thing that we call a river, where you can kind of fly around it and it throws you out in the end. So it's, kind of got this like dual purpose, right? It might be something that's kind of dangerous that you want to avoid. If you like your formation, you don't want to get messed up. But it might also be something that could be really enticing. We give you points for doing it. So maybe if you want to group up or you want to split up into two different squadrons, you could go ahead and do that. So the other thing, and this I think is really the big example that I wanted to show of like letting your ideas kind of marinate and stew and just waiting for things to come to you. So we have this power up in the game. We have a lot of them, right? There's like, spread shot and super lock on and shields and all these things. And one of them was this power up called Solo, where it froze time for everybody but one ship. And so the idea was that this was kind of like a super that you could use to go and like mop up all of the enemies. And like that was pretty cool. But a few problems with it was just like way cooler than all the other power-ups, which created this weird disparity where either I needed to make all the other power-ups much better, or I needed to find some way to kind of like nerf this thing. That didn't seem that appealing. But also the thing that was coolest about it wasn't really like freezing time and destroying all of these other ships, because that could maybe be a little bit of a chore. There's like 80 ships on screen and you just freeze time and you have to go like blow all of them up. That's not that engaging. But what was really interesting was being able to use this to like reform your squadron. So this idea wound up just becoming a constant ability that the player had. They can use the bumpers to go ahead and shift their formation around and take on these different challenges, right? So here you've got the waves coming in this kind of like split formation, so they want to split up to destroy them as they're coming in. Maybe they should be like grouping up a little bit more now that there's a lot of scattered enemies. You see they're dying a lot, but they could also use that to like lock on to enemies and navigate and so forth. And that kind of is like, I think, the most interesting part of the design. That's the thing that every time we would take it to like a con floor, right, when people found this ability, this was the thing that kind of like lit them up, got them the most excited about the game. This is the thing that I find has the highest like skill element to the game, is the ways that you can use this to change your formation and think about things. And it's led to like a more general design principle that I have that kind of permeates all my work, which is what I'd call like free design, or maybe more colloquially like we'd call it loose design or something. Where the quality of expression is really proportional to the number of possibilities, which sounds pretty obvious, but I think a lot of times, and maybe this is just my experience as like a narrative designer, I think a lot of times we try to like limit possibilities. We try to constrain them and say, oh, well, we don't want anything that's like too goofy or that doesn't make sense in this world or that makes the player kind of like embarrassed or feel bad about how they're playing. But I think actually like the more options that you have, I think it just feels better for the player when they discover things that are actually like optimal and interesting. And so, this shows up really through all of the stuff that I've worked on over these 2 years. So an example from that music game that I mentioned, Plurituna, the player has these different voices that are kind of going around at the same time. And so the player is able to weave them together in really any arbitrary order, which can, of course, create some like ugly melodies. It can create kind of weird dissonances. It can feel clunky. But it means when they find something that is actually like really beautiful and interesting, it really feels like they found it themselves, right? And actually, there's a lot of things in that game that have kind of emerged that I never put in the game, right? I was never thinking of that combination. I was never thinking of that type of expression for the player. But they were able to discover that for themselves, which I think is really, that's the thing I find really exciting about game design. Similarly, in this game, Found in Translation, which was at the experimental game showcase, the idea of this game was about translation. And by just making the player be able to write words in any arbitrary order and just translate things kind of however they wanted with these like card mechanics, it led to much more expressive varieties of translation than I could have imagined, right? So the player might be able to, turn the poem into something that rhymes in English, right? They might be able to make it alliterative. They can even write a poem about a completely different subject that has nothing to do with the original source material, but can be seen as being like inspired by, that subject and some of those words. So another thing that I thought was pretty cool that we did in Art of Flight was this playable trailer where we wanted a way to teach the controls to the player at a show floor. We didn't want to just, if you go to a show floor, like you're talking to new people like every 5 minutes, right? Maybe even more. You can lose your voice very quickly. So we wanted some way to just kind of put the player down, let them, play the game, but not have it feel like a tutorial, right? So we did this kind of like WarioWare style like collection of these little like mini games that show them the different controls, kind of pop them through the game very quickly, and showcases a lot of variety. I think I'll skip over this slide just in the interest of time, but if anyone's curious about this stuff, we can talk about it later. So one other thing that I found kind of listening to the game, and this was a relatively late addition, but I think it's like really important and was one of the things that kind of led me to, shipping the game and feeling like it was done. So when you're playing like a game like this, like an arcade game or maybe a roguelike, something like that, there is this knowledge of like inevitable defeat, right? As soon as you sit down and play this game, you just know all of your ships are going to die, right? The question is just how far can you get into the game, which to me felt kind of grim because it meant that all of the interesting like sacrifices that you were making, all the cool narrative moments where like one ship saves another ship or two ships sacrifice themselves to destroy the boss or something, all of those things just kind of wound up feeling a little dull and bereft of meaning because at the end of the day all of these guys are going to die, right? Which, full disclosure, might be a really interesting game. I mean, XCOM is kind of like that in a way. But I wanted to think about ways that we could, kind of change this feeling and see if there's some way that I could make the players, actions actually kind of have more resonance. So one of the things I tried was like a really complete tonal shift where, what if it was more kind of like a sport or a race or a competition or something? That just didn't really feel like what we had made already. So I skipped that idea pretty quickly. And then I was thinking about one of my favorite games as a kid, because I grew up with a Mac, and if you had a Mac in the 90s, there were no games. There was like StarCraft and this guy, Nanosaur, which is a velociraptor who comes from the future to save dinosaurs so that they don't go extinct. And he's got a blaster and a jetpack. It's a really cool game. It's like a non-procedural permadeath open world egg extraction shooter. It's a weird one. It's got like a fixed clock. The game's going to be over, and I think the timer is like 18 minutes or something. Really hard, really interesting game. But I like that idea of like trying to go and save something, right? Like get out with something. So, looks like I'm missing a slide there, but that's fine. So what I added to the game, and it was shown in the trailer, is we added these portals into the game so that you could go ahead and send your ships through this portal so that they would escape. And that will give you a score multiplier, right? So there's actually this kind of off-ramp that you can have, almost like dealing out in a game of poker, or like sending, dealing out your chips, where you say, okay, maybe I've got like 6 guys, I've gotten further in the game than I have before. Rather than pushing my luck and go further, I'm going to exit early, get a big multiplier, and save these 6 ships, before my next run. So, let's see. Yeah, I'll go ahead, some of this rendering stuff we can actually, if just anyone wants to look at, but we've got some cool shots in progress. One of our goals was to create this kind of like painterly rendering style. So we did a lot of experimentations with this. We kind of wound up with this particle effect thing where we take watercolors that our artists would make, we run them through this thing that generates a bunch of particles, and then we simulate those on the GPU, which has this kind of cool, fuzzy like Cosmos look to it, which we really liked. Got some other cool stuff. Did a lot with artists to work on like ship designs. This was probably the last big, like, important part of the game that got done. Was the last like 8 months roughly, where I was working with a lot of artists to kind of figure out, okay, we have these backgrounds, right? Here's the idea of the game. How can we make the ships look good? I had a bunch of kind of like janky programmer art for most of the project. And we wound up with this look where our artists would hand paint the normals. So they would do this in like Photoshop or Substance Painter, make them, very like brushstrokey, which was pretty cool because then the ships can respond to light and, still have this very painterly look. So the last thing that I want to talk about before moving to Q&A is just the music. That's because partially I was asked to talk about the music. And I think it's one of the more like interesting design things that I didn't really know a lot about going into the game. It was a big open question, like how this was going to work. But I knew one of the things I wanted to do was explore some ideas of like dynamic and procedural music and see how I could, get those into kind of an action game context. My previous game, Changes, was a puzzle game that had a lot of these ideas, but I didn't really know how that would translate. So these are just some like amazing pieces of music and really interesting stuff that I kind of took as influence. The name of the game even is a reference to a piece of music by Bach, which I really liked. And, the reason I chose this name is because a fugue is about all of these like independent voices kind of doing their own thing and then coming together to create a really beautiful piece, which was, kind of emblematic of the core idea of the game. So Suzanne Ciani was another big influence. She's a like ambient composer, did a lot of stuff, but I found her because she has this really interesting documentary about her on YouTube where she's composing music for pinball machines, and she's talking about like using the pinball machine as an instrument and treating all the levers and the buttons and all the player actions as like pieces of like a musical ensemble. And so like her work was really influential to me. Another piece was In C by Terry Riley, where this is almost kind of like a musical game where you just give an orchestra all these like little musical fragments with numbers, and you just kind of tell them like, okay, go play a symphony with this stuff, right? Like find a way to arrange it. Maybe you improvise some of it. Maybe you really meticulously figure out who's doing what. And it's led, I think, to like really interesting different versions of this piece of music, which I like listening to. But I found this really, really helpful from a like game design and programming perspective, because it allows you to write very short fragmentary pieces that are very composable, which create really high combinatoric possibilities in music. And it kind of reminded me of game design, right? You have these little systems, you have these little actions and events that can happen. And by stitching them together and trying different combinations of them and seeing how they play off of each other, you get really interesting results. So one final idea that I had for the music was this idea of like counterpoint, where I wanted to create a really strong contrast between the music and the tone, the gameplay and the tone of the music. So this was kind of an idea that I've had in my mind for a long time. This is a movie, Stray Dog by Akira Kurosawa. Great film. And there's this like great climactic, gunfight at the end of the movie. that happens outdoors while this woman is just playing like Mozart at her piano. And I really like that idea, that kind of contrast of, really hectic, scary, life-threatening moments with, rather like beautiful and cheerful music. So here's a little example of some music. I know it's a little quiet, but the way the music works is each type of object in the game essentially has a voice, which is just a sequencer, which is playing these notes. So the player has this kind of like voice for their string or for their boost. They have a like plucked string voice, which is just kind of constantly the like, drive of the engines and so forth. And then when you get more ships in the mix, like here, the Medusas come in with their little guitar part, which gets layered on. And, as we can skip around and listen to other pieces, right? These guys have kind of a higher pitched guitar noise. These guys have, because these are the captive ships that you have to rescue, I wanted them to kind of have like a somber piece of music that was very easily distinguished. Here, you've got kind of different percussive ideas because these guys are like hunting you down. So some of the audio tools, and this is just a thing for like programmers and designers, make good visualizations, or maybe not even good. Maybe that's a matter of opinion here, but make some visualization to help you like understand what's going on in the game. Make data formats because they're very flexible. This allowed me to just like write the audio in a text editor, just kind of like dynamically reload it, experiment very quickly. Copy paste is your friend. It's great. So this is kind of like a domain specific language for that stuff. And yeah, so like I said, each voice is kind of a sequencer. There's one voice that can add tags, and then different pieces can kind of respond to those tags and say, oh, well, hey, if I'm during a boss fight, like this is actually what I want the boost strings to do when you're moving around, right? Or, while the player is in solo mode, this is actually how I want the bass sounds to play when you hit things. So to just wrap up here, I'll just kind of skip through this production stuff real fast. So the goal was to ship in 1 year. We were off by 100%. That's not too bad for programmer estimations. So we shipped in 2 years. That was mostly me on the last year, just because Heather really did run out of money. It was time to find a job. But she would come in and do like engine development and stuff. So a lot of the like art direction and like hiring artists and stuff, that kind of happened on the tail end of the project. We really crunched too early on, I think. It was maybe not super unhealthy because it was exciting, like it's that good type of crunch. But I think I did just wear like too many hats for the pace. I was trying to do too many things, like pitching the project to publishers. I would not do this again just because it kind of is a full-time job to do this stuff. And yeah, so that's some stuff. We got some publisher stuff. I can, talk about that. We released the game sold. Did localization, all this. And I'll just end with this, right? We took it to cons. Like, this was my favorite part, honestly, about making the game, is taking it to cons, seeing like groups of friends and kids play the game and just have a good time. There was a kid at DreamHack that came back like 6 times, right? His parents were like rolling their eyes by the end. And, that's just was, I think, the most fun thing about the game. It's also exhausting, like travel and game development at the same time are really tiring. So it's going to be a while till I go back to a con. Although I say that I'm going to be at TinyCon on February 21st. But after that, I'm taking a break. So yeah, that was kind of my journey on these last 2 years of indie development. I want to turn it over to y'all to see if anyone has questions, things they would like me to talk about, go into more detail. Be happy to. Yeah, what's up?
You said you made this in C++, right?
Yes, yeah.
What made you choose to do that rather than like a conventional?
Yeah, so a big part of it is we just had the engine already, right? We started working on this like before Unreal was like publicly available, right? It's like you could buy an indie license, but it was like $10,000. So really, when we were doing this, like the only options were like Unity or like I forget what Microsoft's little thing was. The thing Celeste was made in. But also, we really like the workflow of our kind of like custom tools. It means that we really know like every part of the engine. And when you're doing a relatively simple game like this, right? I mean, the rendering is doing some fancy, techniques and stuff, right? But we aren't doing like real-time global illumination, yada yada. It just makes it much easier to kind of support that engine like long term. Makes it much easier to optimize things. Actually, I had a blog post about some of the optimizations I did the last like month or so of the game, and those were just things like that would be really hard to do if it was like a 2 million line code base versus like 100,000 line code base. So yeah, but at the end of the day, we like it. That's really, it's just sicko mode. That's all it is. All right. Yeah.
The slide said that you pitched to publishers too early. At what stage in a development cycle do you think is the right stage to pitch to producers or publishers? And like, when should you be bringing it to cons to show it off?
Yeah. So honestly, for cons, I think it probably depends on the con, just because they can be expensive, right? DreamHack was luckily like it's in my backyard and it's free. So just through some Society of Play connections, they have like an indie alley there. Everyone go join the Society of Play. So that was a pretty easy one. It was just like, okay, as long as we have something that's like presentable enough to people to get feedback on, we were happy doing that. Probably don't, like if it's really rough, right, don't put like a store page or something. Maybe don't even say the name, just kind of be like, hey, I just want playtester feedback, right? Mostly it's like good vibes at cons. As far as publishing goes, I think it's probably less about the stage of the project and more just how polished you can get like a vertical slice. And I'm a developer that tends to kind of spread out pretty wide and then do all the polish like at the end, right? And I think, a lot of publishers, obviously, if it's somebody that might be different, but a lot of publishers really want, like, I want to see a video of what the game will look like at the end. And so we were publishing or pitching to publishers maybe like 6 or 8 months in. And, at that point it was like, hey, we have like some rendering experiments of what it would look like. But partially because of the nature of the game, it's very hard to vertical slice because it's like, well, if you just pick one enemy and like one background, you've got like 20 seconds of gameplay, right? But I think it would probably be easier to pitch for teams, and this is the thing I'm going to be doing going forward, just putting more thought and care into the art direction and polishing particular regions of the game to get that solidified like really early. Like I said, on this game, I think we did that a little bit too late, partially because we were thinking we could kind of get away with not having to do some of it. But as we put more time into the project, it's like, okay, well, this should probably look a little bit prettier because we've been doing, if we're going over a year, right, we should like look like we're going over a year. So yeah, that would be more the thing. Just make something that's like looks really nice because as maybe unfortunate as it is from my perspective as a designer, it's much easier for publishers to kind of understand the final product when they can visually see it. Like publishers are not going like, oh, that's a really interesting design aspect. I can see all the like downstream consequences of that. Here's $1 million. They're going like, okay, this doesn't have screenshots that are attention grabbing on Steam. So, that said, probably if you have maybe other things, right? If you've got a team of artists that maybe worked at different studios, it's very variable, but that's just kind of my thoughts on it. Yeah. What else? Yeah, what's up?
You said you'd been like switching between projects or just like running multiple. I was wondering like how often would you switch between them, and like when you do switch, how long would you like work on a game before wanting to like switch again? Yeah, so I would say like the first 6 to 8 months, we didn't do much switching. I did do I did a 1 week game jam. And that was like mostly just be completely off the Art of Flight, just doing that game jam. But I knew at the end of it, it's like, okay, it's the anxiety started to build because you're like crunching for a jam and you're like, oh my God, I'm putting off all this other work that I should be doing. But kind of after that, I would say I probably switched off like at least every like 2 to 3 months, even if it would only be for like a weekend or something. It was not something I was super strict about, right? I'm sure there were times where I would, go longer. But like for Found in Translation, I knew that I was submitting that to the Experimental Game Showcase. So I did take like a month off for that. I was like, okay, I really want to polish this and make it like as presentable and as interesting as possible, kind of fix all the
the things I noticed from the jam. But I would still work on the art of flight a little bit on the side of just doing kind of like, okay, fix a performance thing, catch some bugs. Maybe even it's just playtesting of just like, you take a couple days off, you play your game, and you're like, oh God, I hate it. This does not feel good. Like, okay, hold on. I need to like make a note of this because when I come back to it, I really want to rethink the way I'm doing like some aspect. Honestly think, I mentioned playtesting, you being kind of like your best playtester. I think taking a break is an important part of that. Probably if you're just playing the game every single day for 2 years, it's hard to get that perspective. But trust me, take a week off your game and then play it again. You will start to notice things that playtesters will notice. And it's better for you to notice them because you can fix them instead of being on the con floor and being like, oh God, like, what the hell was that? Like, I need to go fix this thing. Yeah. Yeah, what's up?
When coming up with your like narrative systems and adding like those narrative mechanics into your game mechanics, what was like the biggest challenge when displaying the narrative in the game?
Yeah, specifically for the art of flight or just like in general?
Specifically for the art of play.
Yeah, I think there were kind of like two challenges, and I'm not necessarily going to say I have a solution to either of them, but I just kind of like made a decision. So one of the things pretty early on that I noticed, like when we would take it to con floors, is people were like, "Oh, like what's the lore of this game, right? Am I going to find like audio diaries or is there like unlock screens or something?" And I really didn't want it to be that type of game, partially because I just didn't have a bunch of lore ideas for it, right? So I tried to drive more of the narrative, like feelings of the game, purely through the gameplay systems, right? And for those, it was kind of a free solution because it's just you make the gameplay system and you see, like, how does this make me feel, right? Like, does this make me feel happy and excited and like, oh yeah, I'm like killing these guys? Or does it make me go like, oh damn, that guy like totally blew up. That's a bummer. So there were like a lot of little tonal things. So for example, when all of the ships explode, there isn't really an explosion sound, but I do kind of like a Star Wars like muffled like radio scream. I did like a lot of variations of those. Some of them I try to be like not exactly funny, right, but a little bit like, oh, this guy's like freaking out. Like other ones where this guy's like, oh, like that's it, like I'm dead. So trying to find those things. Also, narrative ideas, again, that weren't exactly like lore-based, but were pretty thematic. We tried very hard to make all of the enemy ships have this kind of cohesive look of being kind of these like naturalistic but like machine constructs and distinguish those from the player so that I didn't want it to feel like you were like killing a bunch of other like people. I wanted it to seem like there's this kind of like tidal wave of like machines that you're just like tearing through trying to rescue people. Also, it was the last 2 years of AI stuff, right? So a lot of things to be upset and be like, yeah, destroy the machines. Those were kind of the things. I think overall, I'm not sure how many of those ideas necessarily like come through to the average player. And I think also it just depends. Like on a con floor, especially, I think people are just kind of like, oh, this is cool. I'm having fun. That's great. I like it. Maybe people playing in their bedroom or with headphones or something kind of notice those like thematic ideas a little bit more. But yeah, I really wanted to try things that were more like indirect, I guess, which is not at all what I'm doing on any of the other games I'm working on right now. But you can take a lesson from that if you want. All right. Anyone else? Oh, yeah, what's up? Oh, hi, who are you?
Ollie. I have a design question.
Yeah.
In an earlier slide, I saw mention of finding aspects of gameplay that players are gravitating towards, and an implication that you would then try to put some interference in that. I'm paraphrasing the notion, but essentially it's the notion of a player is looking to do a thing and then getting in the way of them doing that thing.
Mm-hmm.
What made you come to a design decision like that versus something that somebody would normally think about, which is if someone found something that they want to do, then lean into it? What made you go against the grain?
Yeah, so I think part of it is just by playing the game, right? So if I noticed that I would kind of get into a rut where, every time I see these guys, I just lock onto them. it's like, maybe when you first do it, you get that kind of programmer's high. You're like, ooh, like it works. Like, okay, cool. Like we can add particles. This will be great. And then you do it like 20, 30 more times. You go like, okay, I'm no longer as enamored with the fact that I programmed this. I'm now just kind of like, this isn't fun. So part of it's just that. But also, it's not so much that it's going to like prevent the player from being able to do it. It's just something that's going to get in the way. So now it's like, oh, I definitely want to lock onto those guys. Like I will be locking onto them, but now I need to dodge this asteroid, or I need to make sure to like blow up these guys. So there's one of the ships in the game, the Striker, it kind of hunts you down. And if you try to lock onto it, it like pops your lock on and, breaks whoever was locked onto. So that's like, okay, now you've got this guy that you need to destroy first, and then you can lock onto these other guys. So there's just more like decision-making possibilities there. I think if you kind of like graph it out, I kind of like to think of it as like, you've got all these different, like put each mechanic on an axis, right? And then just see like, okay, how easy, maybe not easy, but like how engaging is this thing to do? How often do I want to do it? All those types of things. And then you can just start to see like, okay, well, I like the fact that I can always lock, like in Doom, right? You probably like the fact that you can run up and like, bash someone in. But maybe there's things like, oh, well, this guy's got a shield, so I have to do something to his shield before I can hit his health and like dash in there. So yeah, I mean, honestly, I think it's a pretty common design approach. Maybe I just have kind of a weirdly like frictional way of describing it as like undermining the player or something. But yeah, it's just trying to get the player to force them to be more engaged and have more decisions like moment to moment, essentially. Yeah. All right. Anyone else? Yeah, what's up?
You mentioned like, figuring out like the core thing about what the game is and what motivates you about it.
Yeah.
Do you mind to just? I know you elaborated on it a lot, but do you mind to about like how do you figure that out? How would you say you just figure out what game personally means to you, what your vision is for it?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. I think part of it is having a good, like one part of it is just having kind of like a good base of inspiration that kind of like motivates you, and it's going to be different on different games. There might be like on Art of Flight, I found there were a lot of specific like games that I had played that I was like, oh, I really like this thing. I want to kind of make something like that. On other games I've made, it's been more like vague, right? There's maybe like a specific mechanical idea or something that's interesting. And then on other stuff, it's more like, I don't know, it's kind of hard to even put into words, but I think you just kind of find that stuff by exploring that space. So there's going to be like some initial idea of like, oh, I want to make a game. But you don't necessarily know like why you want to. You obviously have some like concrete ideas, but there's just like, there's something about this mechanic that's like, you're like, it would be cool if a computer did this. I'm going to go try to make it do that. And then that's when I think it comes down to kind of like listening to the game and going like, okay, why, like what is interesting about this to me, right? And part of that is going to be in the idea itself. Part of it is going to be your own kind of priors that you are bringing into that of like, oh, well, these are things I'm going through in my life right now, or these are other games that really, were meaningful to me. Other people might find like different ideas. That's why when you do a game jam, right, you have a theme and you get 10 different games about the same kind of like topic or idea. And so that's something that can be really beautiful about design. But yeah, I think it's just kind of, a lot of it is just listening to the game, listening to yourself. I mean, honestly, like go for walks. I don't know, like watch movies, play games, I don't know, try to teach a kid board design or something, right? Just like do other things, and like you will start to just like notice that you are thinking about this idea kind of in the background, and one day it'll just be like, like that's really cool. And if it doesn't happen, that's fine. There's plenty of other game ideas to work on. Yeah. All right. We're at 8:10, so I assume time to wrap up. Oh, still good. Okay, yeah. Well, I'm happy to field more questions. If we want, also, I've got a few copies of the game on computers. I think I've also got pulled up here. So if people want to come, just like hang out and chat. Oh yeah, question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You mentioned you had a background in literature.
Yes.
How did you get into game development in the first place? Like, what made you really like get inspired to start making games?
Yeah. So kind of embarrassing in a way because I didn't really make the connection that you could program games, that like games were a thing people made. I was just like, oh, I don't know, like Bungie just like gets a Halo, right? Like people do it somehow, but I don't know, that happens. And I was studying English, and I was kind of about to graduate, and I was like, oh God, like hold on, what are the job prospects like? And it's not good. So I was like, okay, let me go find something else to do. So at UT, I went to UT Austin. They just built this like computer science building, right? Everyone was talking about it. So I was like, okay, like programmers make money. That's cool. And so I did that, and that's where I met some friends because I was going to flunk classes. I needed study groups and so on. And then Heather was like, okay, like like the stuff we're learning, right? You can like do that. That makes video games, right? Like a for loop. Like what if that for loop was like guys on the screen? I was like, oh wait, hold on. Like that's kind of interesting. And then yeah, I just started like honestly the first game that I made was at the student club at UT. They just had a game jam. Heather was like, hey, do you want to do this in, I think we did an enclosure or some Lisp variant. It was like, oh, cool, we can do this. And it was like a little interactive fiction thing, which, again, your background in English, it's like, oh, yeah, you need someone to write this. So that was kind of what got me into games. I mean, I always played a lot of games. I was interested in them kind of like as a format. But I also wasn't aware of a lot of like indie stuff. Because, again, my stuff would have been like, oh, I play like a Kojima game or something. But it's like, oh, that's a team of people that's like, I don't even know where studios are that do that. So yeah, that's kind of how I got into it, was just needing money, hearing programmers got money, and then realizing like, oh, I don't want to do any of that other than make games. All right, last call. If you've got another one, I'm happy to take it.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I heard about how you got into the industry, but I guess how would you recommend someone else get into the industry? Because like I've heard, the situation is pretty complicated, and like I know the number one advice for getting into the industry is don't. But I want to do the number two advice for getting into the industry. Okay.
Oh, okay, yeah. I'm maybe not quite so pessimistic as to say don't. I mean, so take all of this with a grain of salt, because like at the end of the day, I am really like independent, right? Part of the reason I do what I do is because I didn't want a job working at like Ubisoft or something, right? Like no shade to anyone that works at Ubisoft. That's just like not something that I wanted to do. I think the number one thing, whether you're going through like, I don't know, cataclysmic, epochal changes like we are now in the industry, or you were trying to get in like 10 years ago, networking is a big thing. And I don't necessarily just mean networking as in like, schmoozing and like going, shaking people's hands and giving business cards. I really do mean like building connections with people and just like hanging out. I mean, I know people that have got into the games industry just kind of on like they hung out with people for a year or two while they were doing another job, and then something came up and they got recommended for it, right? I know people that have gotten, sometimes they got that job out of school, sometimes they changed careers, things like that. The other thing is have a really good portfolio. Obviously, what a good portfolio means depends a lot on like programmer, art, independent, AAA, all of those things. But I think just make games. Like do game jams, right? Come to the 3D modeling. Even if you're a programmer, right? Come to the talk about the 3D modeling, like pipeline stuff. Because you will meet people, you will learn ideas. It will just be kind of like a general osmosis of in the industry and stuff. And that I think is really important. I don't really know anybody in the industry that's gotten there purely from just, oh, well, I graduated and I saw a job offer on LinkedIn and I applied, right? It's, it's networking, it's portfolio. Those are really the big things. So make games. Luckily, it's an easy answer, right? Because all you got to do is make games. Of course, it's hard to make games, which is maybe not what we want to hear. But yeah, that would be my advice. All right, cool. Oh, yeah, what's up?
Sorry.
Oh, yeah, no worries.
You mentioned there's like a lot of hats that you wore during the production of at least that, and I assume a lot of your other games too. How do you know like how far to take a skill that's outside of like your I guess your main skill tree or whatever, like before saying like, oh, like it will take too much time to get it to the level that I want it to be for this thing, so instead I'll just like drop it and focus on this.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I would say, like, part of, I do wear a lot of hats. Some of them are hats that I'm like pretty comfortable with. So there's like I can do engine develop. Like if someone here is like, oh, like we need to port the game to like iOS, right? It's like, okay, I can do that. I don't want to, but I can do it. There, writing, design, and stuff. Art is just something I'm like not comfortable with at all, right? On almost like any dimension. So I will like wear the art hat in the like I gray box a thing to be like, okay, this is the ship that, shoots these types of things. So it's like playable, but not like presentable at all. Maybe I'll do a little bit of art direction, but even then I'm tending to work with artists very closely and be like, okay, these are some general ideas I have, but I really want you to kind of like do some heavy lifting and help me like think about how to pull this off. Specifically for the Art of Flight, the hat that I wore that was the most kind of like, not necessarily the most out of field, but it was a big responsibility that I was like not so sure about, was doing music. So I've like played music for years and like messed around with things, but I've never like composed a piece of music or anything. Part of what motivated me to do that is that we had been talking to a composer who wanted like 10 to 20 grand to work on the game, and we were like, there's no way we can afford that. Could you do anything less? And then he just stopped responding. But I mean, nice guy, no hard feelings. But it was like very clear. It's like, okay, either like I'm going to do this, or we need to like change directions or find someone else. And at that point, it was just kind of, I had a clear enough idea of like mechanically what I wanted to do with the music that I was just like, okay, could I do this on a fixed timeline? Probably not. But if I just have like the game needs to get done sometime kind of soon, I can, do this off and on. So, part of that was just experimenting. Like I mentioned, that other game jam of just like, okay, I need to just take a week and like only think about music, right? And take off all the other hats and not worry about this stuff. But, I had some, I don't want to undersell it too much, right? I had some like skills, I knew like, I know what harmony is, right? So I when I hear something bad, I could be like, that's why, that's not good. But also it was something I was interested in learning more about. And not that I'm not interested in learning more about art. Like I love art. I've been like sketching and stuff recently, and I really love doing it. But I just know it's like at the level that I want to be making games, I'm not going to be able to devote enough time to get my skills up to that level. Whereas music was a little bit more of like, okay, I have some basic skills. I need to like really just focus on these. And, I'm sure in a lot of ways the music is very like naive and amateurish. And in some ways I'm not exactly embarrassed about it, but I am just kind of like, it is that sort of like, like that's really interesting. But like, I know there's just lots of like hokey things I did that like, 2 years from now I'll go like, oh, like this would have been such a better idea. Like, why didn't I do that? So yeah, I think part of it is that. Also, it just comes down a lot to like, who do I know? I just happen to know a lot of 2D and 3D artists. So it's easier to go, I like, please come help me. Like I desperately need it. I don't know as many like C++ engine developers. So like, there's not as many people to bother with like, why is it crashing on the Steam Deck, right? It's just like, I gotta go open the debugger. Yeah. Yeah, what's up?
When you actually released the game, did you ever go back and update anything?
Yeah, we've actually done a couple updates. Some of them were just not exactly like performance things, but little like tweaks here and there. There have been some design tweaks I did to the game, and also actually on the subject of music, there were definitely things that I like in release. There were like to-dos of like, okay, I don't hate this boss music, but I want to go change the boss music pretty badly. And so, maybe like a month or so after development, I kind of like started going in and just, tweaking things, cleaning that up there. We had considered, as there are on the cutting room floor, there are like 3 kind of like big like boss ideas. But at the end of the day, I was excited enough about other projects and just like the artists I'd worked with were kind of on to other things. So I was like, maybe we'll do an update to add some of those bosses in. But I was just kind of like, the game's not like missing any like big, it's not like it has a big chunk missing out of it. But no major like content updates or anything like that. Yeah.
This might be a little specific, but I imagine like you were kind of designing programming like as a team. What were some ways that you kind of like coordinated with your other team members for how you're moving forward?
Yeah. So to some degree, Heather and I do just have kind of a general rapport about programming where we can kind of just go off and do our own thing. It's like I can just kind of say, we need a physics system. She can go, okay, like I'm on it. Do some stuff, right? Maybe we'll like have a call, once or twice, talk about like, okay, like, yeah, oh, that's really good. I like that idea. Or like, okay, no, like, please don't, like, that's an interesting way to design it, but like, I'm trying to ship a game. Like, I just like, this will be easier to design with. But also just like, honestly, like a lot of kind of messaging back and forth, a lot of, recording gameplay snippets. So she lives like on the other side of the country. So we aren't like, in an office working together. So really like calls are kind of the primary way that we do it. Again, we probably talk, I mean, honestly, towards the beginning of the project, right, we probably talk like almost every night, even if it was just kind of like, hey, we're both going to be programming. We probably aren't talking that much, but we're just kind of around. So, and then we would do some pair programming of like, like one thing she took control of very early on was the character controller. She had some ideas for like how to do the ships. And so a lot of that infrastructure got laid down of just kind of me like on the phone with her. She'd push build. I play around. I go like, oh, that's interesting. Can we try doing this, or messing around with things. And then I kind of took it from there as we did more design. Lots of the character controller got changed like probably like every 2 months. Which there were just like so many little like, ooh, like let's tweak this thing. Let's kind of tighten this idea up here. But yeah, honestly, it's probably not something that's super scalable to like we have 4 programmers, right? You probably can't just have like 4 people calling each other all the time. Because we've worked together for a long time, it really is just kind of like talking and bouncing ideas around. And then also sometimes being territorial, also of just like, it's like, okay, like just let me do the physics system. Like just give me a couple days, it'll be fine. Worst case, like we delete it and we're like down 2 days, right? It's like, it's fine. And just kind of like trusting each other. Again, that's like much easier to do when you know someone's style, right? Because like, we've been working on this engine a lot. We know what we like, we know what we don't like, we know where we kind of like differ, and maybe maybe I prefer a slightly more like simple style, right? Heather might be a little bit more interested in like some fancy programming things, but not like I know she's never taking it to like, oh, I'm like the physics system is all this like templatized like meta programmed thing. It is mostly just like we have we allocate memory, we do things, we fill it up. So yeah. All right. What else? Every time I ask if there's more questions, I get a stray hand. One more time. All right, cool. Yeah. Now I'm happy to end here.
Okay, so that's all the questions for now. I think you guys are still welcome to ask questions in the next couple of minutes privately.
Yeah, I'll be around hanging out. Yeah.
Yeah, and we're going to be testing the game up here. Not testing, but playing through it, seeing if you guys can enjoy the experience in ways to explain, see if you have any thoughts on it, discuss it some more. We have 2 laptops ready up here, but we might move to another spot in a second at one point. But yeah, thank you guys for coming out. I really appreciate it. And can I also get one more thank you for our guest speaker?
Thank you, stranger.
All right. Right? We have a space until 9 p.m. That's when we get kicked out. So until then, we might leave early too, but until then we'll be playtesting, and then after that we'll have dinner. Sounds good to you?
Yeah.